Tonight I'm going to be soldering together the You Turn Me On kit. The first thing I do is I open the kit and I check for all the parts. In this case, there's a board, at least 11 LEDs, 4 resistors, a button, a capacitor, and inside the battery holder, there's a microcontroller. I put it inside the battery holder so that it wouldn't get squished if I shipped it. So I start with the resistors, basically because they're the flattest thing. It's easiest to start flat and work your way to the bigger items. So I just take the leads on the resistor and I bend them a little bit. And then I thread them through the holes. And I try and keep these leads at a right angle as much as possible. And I take my soldering iron and I apply a little solder. And then I do that for the other side. And then I take my wire cutters and I trim the leads. And I do that for all the resistors. So often when I'm soldering components, I solder one side and just check that it's lying where I want it on the board. It's a little hard to see. So I make sure that it's lying flat on the board. And then I solder it again, or solder the other side. And the reason I leave the leads at a right angle is that if I have to remove the component later, it's much easier if they're at a right angle. Like say I solder the wrong size resistor. It's easier if all the pins are at a right angle. And then I take the capacitor and I bend this just a little bit. This might be easier with needle nose pliers, but I don't have any with me right now. So I basically bend it like this. And then just thread it through. And then I check that I like the alignment on this side. And in this case, I'm going to just realign it a little bit. And flip it over. And then I solder the button. Yep. And then I'm going to solder the microcontroller. And if you look at this board, there's a star here and there's a dot on the microcontroller. Sometimes there's a notch cut out, like on this silkscreen, and you just need to make sure that the star matches the dot or the notch matches the notch, because this is the only component that if you solder it in backwards, you're going to have a major problem. The LEDs might not work if they're backward, but you can unsolder them and it won't break anything. If you solder this on backward, it might break your microcontroller, and unsoldering it and putting it in the right direction might not work. So to put this guy in, I have to bend his leads a little bit so that they're at right angles, because they come a little bit not at right angles. And then I just set him in the board. Check to make sure that this dot is matched up with that star. Flip it over. Then I solder one pin, and holding the microcontroller, I just push it into place, and then it's perfectly flat on the board. And then I solder the other pins. And when you're soldering through-hole components, solder always wants to flow, actually, through-hole or surface mount, doesn't matter. Solder always wants to flow from the coldest point to the hottest point. So you never solder by taking solder and putting it on the tip and then trying to transfer it to the board. Rather, you put the soldering iron tip on the pad, so one of these metal circles, and you put the solder on the metal circle at the same time, and then it'll flow across the board onto the tip, making a better joint. So the last thing to do, well, not the last thing, but one of the last things to solder are the LEDs, and these have a polarity to them. If you look, there's a flat side here, there's a square pin and a round pin, and this double line has a flat side. And if you look, there's a flat side on this little hat part. So if you feel around on the edge, you'll be able to feel it as well, and not just see it. But also, this lead is shorter and that lead is longer, so you can tell that way. So I just go ahead and I stick an LED in there, and I flip it over, and I solder it into place. And then I realize I don't like the alignment, and so holding it with my finger, I just remelt the solder, and then it's perfectly flat on the board. And I go ahead and do that for all the other LEDs. Actually, I'm going to solder the other pin first and then do that for all the other LEDs. And that's an example of removing your finger too fast before the solder has time to re-solidify. So often when I'm teaching, I tell my students to count to 3 before they let go. So basically, remove the soldering iron tip, count to 3, and then remove your finger. Okay. So I take the black wire and I set it like that. And I solder it to the negative contact. Black is usually negative in electronics. And then I take the red wire and I solder it to the plus side. And then I'm going to push this black wire in a little bit. I'm going to push the red wire in a little bit. Okay. And then I just double check that this dot and the star that's underneath there are right. And they are. and that the red wire is on the plus and the black wire is on the minus, because that's the only thing I can truly screw up. And this is in the off position. And then I put in the batteries, and then I turn it on to check, and notice that all of them blink quickly, and then it works. So now that I have a working version, then I just go and plug in my hot glue gun. Once you've checked that the board is working correctly, it's hard to see in the camera, but you can see that it's working correctly. Then the next step is to just take a hot glue gun and glue it onto the battery holder. Like this. And then you have a fully assembled board. So I hope you enjoyed watching me putting that together, and if you bought one, I hope that helps you figure out how to put it together. Thanks for watching.